The blood on the hay wasn't from any animal Ezra Thornton had ever slaughtered. He stood in the doorway of his barn, lantern raised high against the pre-dawn darkness, taking in the scene that would haunt him for years to come. A woman lay curled in the far corner, her dress torn and mud-stained, dark bruises blooming across her face like poisonous flowers. She'd wrapped herself in an old horse blanket, but it couldn't hide the way her hands shook or the way she flinched when his light found her. "Easy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Easy now." She tried to push herself further into the corner, but there was nowhere left to go. Her left eye was swollen shut, and dried blood crusted her split lip. Whoever had done this hadn't just beaten her. They'd tried to break her spirit, leave her with nothing but shame and terror. Ezra set the lantern on a hay bale and slowly lowered himself to one knee, making himself smaller, less threatening. In the flickering light he could see she was young, maybe 25, with auburn hair that had escaped its pins and hung in tangles around her shoulders. Her good eye watched him with the wariness of a cornered animal. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said. "Name's Ezra Thornton. This is my land, my barn. You're safe here." The woman's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her throat was likely too raw for words, too damaged by whatever hell she'd escaped from. Ezra had built this life alone on purpose, 500 acres of Montana territory, far enough from town that neighbors were strangers and strangers were rare. At 38 he'd grown comfortable with solitude, content with the company of his cattle and the rhythm of seasons. He'd never married, never courted, never felt the need for anything beyond the simple satisfaction of working land that belonged to him. But looking at this broken woman in his barn, something shifted inside his chest, a recognition he couldn't name, a responsibility he couldn't ignore. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She shook her head, whether because she couldn't speak or wouldn't trust him with the truth, he couldn't tell. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant hoofbeats, still miles off but coming closer. The woman heard them too. Her entire body went rigid, and what little color remained in her face drained away completely. Someone was coming, and whoever it was, she was terrified they'd find her. Ezra's mind raced as the hoofbeats grew clearer on the morning air. 3 horses, maybe 4, riding hard across the valley floor. In this territory, men who rode with purpose before sunrise were usually hunting something, or someone. "They coming for you?" he asked. The woman's nod was barely perceptible, but it told him everything he needed to know. She pressed herself deeper into the hay, making herself as small as possible, and Ezra saw the raw desperation of someone who knew exactly what would happen if she was found. He had a choice to make, and not much time to make it. Turn her over to whoever was tracking her, the safe choice, the smart choice, the one that would keep his peaceful life intact, or stand between a broken woman and whatever had put those bruises on her face. "Listen to me," he said, urgency creeping into his voice. "Can you walk?" She struggled to sit up, wincing with every movement. Her ribs were likely cracked, maybe worse. Walking wasn't going to be easy, but staying hidden in the barn was impossible. The hoofbeats were close enough now that he could hear individual horses, the jangle of tack, the low murmur of men's voices carried on the wind. Ezra made his decision. House is 50 yards, back doors unlocked. Get yourself cleaned up, put on something decent. There's women's clothes in the chest upstairs, belonged to my sister before she married and moved east. He paused, studying her battered face. "When those men come calling, you're going to be my wife. Understand?" Her good eye went wide with shock. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's the only way. A man's wife gets certain protections under law, even out here. But you got to sell it. Act like you belong, like this is your home." The riders were close enough now that he could make out their silhouettes against the lightening sky. 4 men, riding in formation like a posse, or like bounty hunters. Ezra stood and reached down to help her up. "What they want you for?" She finally found her voice, though it came out cracked and raw. "I killed him." The confession hung between them like a loaded gun. Ezra's hand stopped halfway to hers, and for a moment the only sound was the approaching thunder of hooves. "Good," he said, and pulled her to her feet. Outside, voices called out across his land, rough, angry voices that carried the authority of men used to taking what they wanted. Thornton, we know you're in there. Asterisk. Ezra helped the woman stumble toward the house, her weight leaning heavy against his side. Each step sent visible pain through her broken ribs, but she bit back any sound that might give them away. Behind them, boots hit the ground as the riders dismounted, their voices carrying the casual violence of men who'd ridden long distances to collect what they considered theirs. Check the barn, boys. She's here somewhere. Blood trail leads right to this place. Ezra recognized the voice now. Marcus Webb, the territorial judge's son, a man who'd never been told no in his 26 years of life. Word around the territory was that Webb had a taste for young women and the money to make problems disappear when they refused his advances. They made it to the house just as Webb's voice boomed across the yard. Thornton, get out here. We got legal business to discuss. Ezra's kitchen was sparse but clean, a bachelor's space with little warmth or personality. He guided the woman to the wash basin, handed her a clean cloth. Fast as you can, he whispered. There's a blue dress in the chest upstairs, should fit near enough. She nodded and began washing the blood from her face, her movements quick despite the pain. Up close, even battered and broken, she was beautiful, the kind of beauty that would catch a man like Webb's attention and never let go. Heavy boots stomped across his front porch. We know she's here, Thornton. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Ezra stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. 4 men stood in his yard, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of men who'd ridden through the night on an ugly mission. Webb stood front and center, his expensive clothes and soft hands marking him as someone who preferred others to do his dirty work. Morning, Webb. Little early for social calls, ain't it? Cut the shit, Thornton. We're tracking a murderer, woman by the name of Catherine Mills, killed her employer in cold blood and fled into the hills. Blood trail leads straight to your barn. Ezra kept his expression neutral. Lot of blood in a barn, Webb. Could be from any number of sources. Don't play games with me. Webb stepped closer, his hand resting on his gun. She's here, and I mean to have her. Woman's got to answer for what she's done. What exactly did she do? Webb's smile was cold as winter wind. Stabbed my business partner right through the heart when he tried to collect what she owed him. Self-defense, she claims, but a dead man tells no tales. The front door opened behind Ezra, and every man in the yard went silent. Catherine stood in the doorway, wearing the blue dress, her auburn hair pinned back in a simple style that somehow made her look like she'd lived in that house for years. The bruises were still visible, but she'd washed the blood away and carried herself with a dignity that spoke of breeding, of a life that had once been very different from whatever had led her to his barn. Marcus Webb, she said, her voice steady despite everything. I wondered when you'd come. Webb's face flushed red. Catherine, you're looking, well, considering you had your partner try to rape me before I put a knife through his ribs. Her words cut through the morning air like a blade. Yes, I suppose I'm doing well enough. Ezra felt something settle into place inside his chest, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. This wasn't about money or debts or simple violence. This was about power, about men like Webb who thought they could take whatever they wanted from women who had no protection. Now, Catherine, Webb said, his voice taking on a false reasonableness, you know that ain't how it happened. Robert was just collecting what you owed for room and board. You turned violent when he asked for payment. Payment? Catherine's laugh was bitter as winter coffee. Is that what we're calling it now? Ezra stepped closer to Catherine, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. The gesture was small, almost unconscious, but it spoke volumes to every man watching. Seems to me, he said quietly, my wife's given her account of what happened. Question is whether you plan to respect a man's home and family, or if you're fixing to cause trouble on my land. Webb's eyes narrowed. Your wife, that's convenient timing, Thornton. Married her 3 days ago. Ezra reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin gold band, his mother's wedding ring, kept all these years in case he ever found reason to use it. Without hesitation, he slipped it onto Catherine's finger. Had a quiet ceremony in town. Preacher Morrison performed the service. The lie rolled off his tongue smooth as honey, But when Catherine looked up at him, he saw something in her good eye that went beyond gratitude, recognition, maybe, or the beginning of something that could grow into truth given time. Webb's hand dropped to his gun. "I don't believe you." "Don't much care what you believe," Ezra replied. "But you're on my property, threatening my wife. Suggest you move along before this gets unpleasant." For a moment the yard balanced on a knife's edge between violence and retreat. The standoff stretched until one of Webb's men shifted nervously in his saddle. "Marcus, maybe we should." "Shut up, Davis." Webb's eyes never left Ezra's face. "You think putting a ring on her finger changes what she is, what she's done?" Ezra's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than any shout. "What she is, Webb, is a woman who defended herself against a piece of trash who tried to force himself on her. What she's done is survive, and what you're doing right now is threatening my family on my land. This ain't over, Thornton." "Yes it is." Catherine stepped forward, her chin raised despite the bruises. "Because tomorrow morning, I'm riding to Denver to give my testimony to a federal marshal about your business arrangements with men like Robert Hayes, about the girls who disappeared, the debts that could only be paid one way, the whole rotten enterprise you've been running." Webb's face went dead white. "You can't prove nothing. I kept records, Marcus. Names, dates, amounts. Robert wasn't your only partner, and I wasn't your only victim, but I was the first one to fight back, and I won't be the last." Webb jerked his gun from its holster, but Ezra was faster. The Winchester that had been leaning against the doorframe was suddenly in his hands, the barrel centered on Webb's chest. "Drop it," Ezra said quietly. "Drop it and ride away, or I'll put you down right here in my yard." For 5 heartbeats, death hung in the morning air. Then Webb slowly holstered his weapon, his hands shaking with rage and something that might have been fear. "This ain't finished," he said, backing toward his horse. "Yes," Catherine replied, "it is." They watched the 4 riders disappear into the valley, dust rising in their wake like ghosts of bad decisions. When the hoofbeats finally faded, Ezra turned to find Catherine watching him with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. We got a lot to figure out, you and I." She looked down at the gold band on her finger, then back up at his weathered face. "Ezra Thornton, are you asking me to make this real?" Years later, when their children played in that same yard, when Catherine's bruises had healed, and her laughter filled the house with warmth, Ezra would remember this moment, the sunrise when a broken woman became his wife, when protection became love, when 2 lonely souls found home in each other. The empty barn door swayed gently in the morning breeze, no longer hiding secrets, only holding the promise of new beginnings.